the teenagers are going to go through the actual resource page by page. And then finally, after that, we're going to go for the Q&A session. So firstly, I suppose where the project started, during one of my occupational therapy work placements, I was lucky enough to work with Dyspraxia Ireland. And with my background in teaching, I thought a lovely resource to do would be a resource for schools, for teachers, to help them work with and understand children with DCD and dyspraxia. And I suppose that the idea was, a resource by a teacher for teachers, brilliant. Sure, what could go wrong? But then during my work with the children and teenagers with Dyspraxia Ireland, it kind of came to the fore that I wasn't actually the expert in this at all. That working with, in one session, particularly working with Noah during the session, it kind of became very obvious about his insight and understanding of his life was much better than maybe say I could ever understand. And then potentially working in another group, say with Chloe was one of the participants in the group at the time. We were doing a session. It was a lovely session working with working away, and we did icebreakers, getting the children to know each other. And about 5-10 minutes in, and we realized a lot of the children already knew each other. They'd played online games online, and they kind of just lit another light bulb in my head saying, we come in as these therapists, teachers, thinking we know all, we have a massive background and we think we know an awful lot. But in reality, the key resource, the key information, the experts are the people you're working with. And so kind of from there, the resource became a lot more of an organic moving process. And I suppose we began just with a video, kind of more interactive format of me explaining what the idea would be. So the children, teenagers working to explain to teachers, to schools, their experiences and how they can help. So we sent out the video, got some feedback, got some of the participants involved from day one. So then we kind of met and we started exploring ideas, started getting different ideas, thoughts, and where we could go with it. And straight away, really, the participants really took ownership over it, which was brilliant. And I suppose from there on, and began with kind of a paper-based survey where they typed up their interests, their ideas, where it might go, what they'd like to actually get across in the resource. And that kind of laid the foundations. And then secondly, then we kind of, the next step, we got an online survey. So kind of we used an online interactive app where there was multiple choice questions, there was open-ended questions, and all the participants together kind of gave their ideas and thoughts. And that got some really rich, really valuable, really interesting information that actually led to a large amount of the recommendations we make at the end of the resource for schools and teachers. So then once we had that, we looked at the threads and the trends coming through. And something that came up a lot was the idea that everyone with dyspraxia or DCD has their own unique background, their own unique story, and it affects everyone so uniquely that they didn't want this resource to be just a generic resource. They wanted to make it individual and personal. So the participants came up with the idea of a personal profile, including areas such as strengths, challenges, things they'd like their schools to do, and something special about them. So it really gave a personal aspect to it. And then once we had all that information together, it was kind of coming over and back with different resources, different ideas, and kind of it was really interesting because especially some of the older participants, and including the younger ones as well, really came back with great ideas, even for fonts, for organization, for the order in which the different sections come across, and they really did take ownership and were really impressive throughout. I suppose then that's where we got to today with the final resource. And I suppose from now, the next thing we're going to show now is just a video that some of the participants, they sent in their clips with together to make it show their ideas. So it's not all me just talking throughout the whole thing. So I suppose it was kind of looking at that. And just recommend turn up your volume to the highest setting to hear it.
I really enjoyed working with you. It was great to meet people who had similar difficulties. I especially enjoyed preparing and getting organised for secondary school. I feel more confident and I feel more organised now. Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed it as well, Stephen. Thank you very much.
Dyspraxia is a hidden disability. I might look the same as my friends, but there are certain things that they can do that I struggle with, such as pouring a drink, sequencing, and remembering stuff. The way I see it is, there's nothing I can't do, but I just have to work a little bit harder than everyone else. The qualities of a good teacher, in my opinion, are that they're patient, understanding, they have good listening skills, and they can get me / understand me.
What is DCD to me? DCD to me is a disability, but it doesn't stop us from doing the things that we want to do. So don't let it. Remember, it takes us longer to do certain things, but at some point you will get whatever you are struggling to do. What can teachers do to help children with DCD/dyspraxia? Teachers should give us more time on tests and just in general, like packing a bag. Let us have a few more minutes to pack a bag. Teachers should also let us get day for a bit, as some of us can't sit down for a long period of time. Just teachers should also get to know us, because if they get to know us, they'll understand a bit more. Because some teachers just don't understand, and some teachers should also like get to know what's going on in our head, because our head is a very cool place, I guess.
It helps to move classes because it's better to move around for 8 hours than it is to sit still for 6 hours, and the classes are just the right length. It's better to have folders that contain all of my books for each subject because that way I won't lose anything. And in secondary school, I feel like I'm treated like a human being instead of a part of a group.
Dyspraxia means I have a superpower. I am a good artist. I am a wonderful person. And I would like this project to help other children with dyspraxia. From Ryan Doherty, Katie Donegal. I'll see you later. Bye!
I suppose looking at those videos, the children, teenagers, fabulous in them. Like they're come across so professionally. They show just such great insight into their own lives, and like at times you just have to stop and remember how young some of them are, because of how well they're able to carry and express themselves. And I suppose that really is the crux of what this resource is about, giving these young people their chance to have their say in their lives. And I think they do it really, really well. And so now we're just going to go on to looking at the actual physical resource. So Chloe's going to give me a hand with 1 or 2 slides as we go through. So I'm just going to share the resource here. I have it in PowerPoint here, but it's going to be in PDF form when it's released. So looking just at the first slide here, it shows the title at the start, Our Say in Our Schools, that we kind of worked through as a group and came to that title. And then it kind of explains it's a resource for schools working with young people with dyspraxia, developed by young people with dyspraxia. And I suppose in that sense, it's something quite novel that it really is entirely owned by the young people, and it is their work and their voice coming through. And I think the quote there that Chloe came across for me was, don't worry about walking a day in our shoes, just try a day thinking in our heads. And that really summarizes kind of the thread that comes throughout the resource of, it's not just about looking at what we are, the children, young people, the people with dyspraxia's physical day. It's looking at how they experience everything as well. And it's all about trying to understand exactly where it's coming from. And I suppose here, the preface, we're not going to read through the entire piece of it. And I suppose the summary of it all really comes down to the fact that I came in thinking I was the expert with all my background and skills, but in reality, these young people, these children are 100% the experts. They have amazing insights. They have amazing talents that we were lucky enough that they were willing to share. And it comes across so well throughout. And I think that's really the main point in the last paragraph, kind of summarizes the whole thing as well here, that this is the only piece of writing that I did. Everything else is the children's work. And I suppose it's really important that, like, when I at the front of this, it says I'm the facilitator, and that is what I was. I'm not the author, and all the participants are the authors. So for our introduction here, Chloe's going to go through what the goals are, what the children thought and what they didn't want, and what then kind of give the contents of the stages of the resource. So take it away there, Chloe, whenever you're ready.
Our goals are to help our children with DCD/dyspraxia, to have a voice heard, and to help schools and teachers understand us and our lives. We think that people with dyspraxia, people don't know enough about dyspraxia. It would be great if our teachers knew a bit more about our lives with dyspraxia. We don't want to be treated differently. We just want teachers to appreciate that we all learn differently and we have different learning styles, and the same, and we are literally just the same as any other, and as any other child. What are we going to be talking about? The definition of dyspraxia, how every person with dyspraxia is different, our personal profiles, our daily lives in school, and our advice for schools and teachers.
Brilliant. Thanks a million for that, Chloe. And I suppose it was like, Chloe, you did really, really well there. And it's really good that, like, it's their goals, what they thought, what they want, and what they are talking about throughout the resource. And I'll do a lot of talking here today because it is quite daunting to have to go through the whole resource. But I think it's really great that Chloe was confident and happy enough to do it. So thanks a million for that, Chloe. Then I suppose the first kind of page, we kind of looked at what is dyspraxia, and we kind of made a point of saying in books. So we look at it from a theoretical point of view, and the participants kind of researched, and they came up with dyspraxia is a development disorder of the brain in childhood causing difficulty in activities, concentration, and movement. And amongst the three cogs there, it shows that dyspraxia affects between 10% and 2% of the population, which is a very large number. And it looks at 10% of the population with too severely affected. So it's different for everyone. But most commonly for people, I suppose they'd know a lot about much more about the physical aspect, or the primary concerns, which would be the motor coordination, fine motor skills, skill learning and balance, those aspects. But also kind of what we felt was very important to come through as well as the secondary concerns. So those kind of primary concerns may lead to less opportunities for success and different experiences in life, which then might lead to secondary concerns such as low self-esteem or low self-confidence. And I suppose the last line we felt was really, really important, because it says that dyspraxia does not impact on intelligence. So in general, people with dyspraxia or DCD have average to above average intelligence, but sometimes they can find school and aspects of school difficult. So when you look at that, you're kind of saying how for schools and teachers, it's really important to look and say, how can we make the most use of this, and how can we benefit these children in the best way and meet their needs? So it's something that you probably don't really think about a lot, but we thought it was really important to reinforce. And then, so it's lovely to have the theoretical and aspect, but we also thought it was really important to have the personal aspect. So Noah, Ryan, and Chloe all gave us their interpretation, their understanding of dyspraxia. So for Noah first there, he gives a fabulous analogy of dyspraxia being like a filter on his learning and thinking. And it's just a case of how it affects Noah. And it's a really nice way of explaining it. And then you've got Ryan, who gives a lovely interpretation of his experience, saying it's a superpower because it makes him the way he is. And then Chloe gives a really personal, really easy to relate with image of just the stress and anxiety that can be associated with. So I think it's really good to have this as a real personal understanding. And to be perfectly honest, in my opinion, this is much more accurate in explaining dyspraxia than a written technical definition found in a book. So well done to them here for bringing that across. And then the next kind of page we looked at, is it just me that has dyspraxia? So at times some people might have dyspraxia or DCD in a situation where they don't know anyone else who has dyspraxia or DCD. And the kind of the quote is here, it's not the end of the world, it's the beginning of a whole new world. And a trend that kind of came up through it was that, like, this living with dyspraxia can be an obstacle, but it's not a barrier, it's not stopping anyone. So here we can see some really famous people. Cara Delevingne is a supermodel and an actor. We have Florence Welch from Florence and the Machine, Daniel Radcliffe, who's a Harry Potter actor, and Albert Einstein. And some of these people even consider that living with dyspraxia and their experiences of living with dyspraxia or DCD enables them to have more creativity, or allow them to have more creativity, which is something really positive. And I suppose it's lovely seeing these 4 people here, but I've no doubt, based on the abilities and talents of the 7 participants we had, that no doubt we'll have 7 different faces on this in 10 to 20 years time, looking at them as inspiration. I think that's kind of the whole aspect of this page, is the hope side. Here we have page, and I think this is probably is definitely one of my favorite pages anyway. And it's just explaining dyspraxia affects all people differently. And I think that was really something that the group really thought was important for teachers and educators and people they work with to know. No two people experience dyspraxia the same way. And I think looking kind of, there's a metaphor analogy there in the middle of it, saying it's not like a child with a cut finger, it's not cut and dry. And I think a lot came through from the group, saying that teachers may have worked with one person with dyspraxia or DCD and had a set of strategies that worked really well for that child, but then thought it would carry over to another. And the nature of dyspraxia or DCD is just so unique and different to everyone. For example, like these pictures here are fabulous as well. We see Noah with his kind of Tiger Woods or Shane Lowry perfect golf swing. And like Noah in his personal profile coming up says that he finds writing for long periods of time difficult, but then he's an amazing golfer. Or even we have Chloe, who's speaking with me here today, and she's mentioned in her profile that she has verbal dyspraxia and had difficulty speaking when she was younger. And then she comes and she's one of the most confident, most capable 14-year-olds that you'll ever meet. And then you can just see her there hanging out with Miriam O'Callaghan on a chat show, and it's no bother to her, nothing phases her. I think that's just really important from this page, and it's really important throughout the whole thing, that it's not a one size fits all, you know how to treat it. It's everyone's different, and you have to work from the person forward and see how you can help from there. And kind of in line with that, then as a group, we felt it's grand to say it, and the kind of children and teenagers said it'd be a great idea to have our own personal profiles where we can actually just explain this is the person. And this is who we are. And I think, like, some people chose pictures, some people chose emojis, depending on what they felt represented them best. There's 4 areas we kind of looked at: strengths, things I find challenging, what I would like to do, what would like schools to do, and something special about me. So, for example, we have Chloe up first there, alphabetically anyway. And Chloe is just like an amazingly determined young lady. Like, nothing phases her. She keeps going. We get the job done. Amazing. And like, she has technology is one of the things that she's really good at. And she was a godsend throughout the whole process with any issues with technology. She was dragging me along through it. And she was brilliant from that aspect. Then moving on to Connor. Connor was great fun to work with. And was really nice guy, and looking at his really kind of active person, loving martial arts, swimming and cycling, and so, like, Connor's a really good cyclist, and it's something that he's really proud of. So it was really nice that he shared that with us. And then coming on next, we have Gabby, and Gabby's just has an incredible insight and understanding of the world around her, and an amazing ability to share it in different mediums. And as you can see there, even in her strengths, that she's a really creative individual with writing, art, drama, singing, all shining through. And then next, we're looking at Kiana's profile. And Kiana was just one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. So polite, so kind, and a joy to work with all the way through. And she's a really creative individual, ranging from the art side to the baking. And even you'll see later on there some of her artwork that she made during one of the colouring apps she did, and it's fabulous. And then looking at Noah, who's just one of the nicest and most genuine people you'll ever meet. At times when I was working with him, I had to stop and say, is this young man still a teenager? Like, And I have to say as well, he's definitely the most modest golfer I've ever come across. He's ranked as one of the top 10 golfers from his local club, including adult members on a regular basis. He's beating adults, but I had to twist his arm there to mention that is a special thing about him. Then next there's Rianne, and Rianne's just great fun, a joy to work with. Always brings fun and energy to every conversation. You're never bored, and she's really active. Loves her basketball, loves cycling, and again, it also has artwork included later on in the piece. And then we have, last but by no means least, we've Ryan. As you can see in his video there, he's a real character. Such a lovely, honest, nice, and giving young man. And he's mentioned there art is one of his strengths, and he is a fabulous artist. And we'll see in the next page just some of his work coming up. So here we have some skills and talents that we just said would show in the piece. It adds a bit of colour and really, really personal aspects. So we can see a drawing of Sonic by Ryan, and it's as good as you'd nearly believe it was in a comic book itself. It's a brilliant drawing. And then you look at the pictures designed and coloured by Kiana and Rianne using an art therapy app. So again, you can see the detail that they've gone into during the colouring, and they're fabulous and really add to the piece, I think. So the next kind of step we thought was really important. We've explained who we are, where we're coming from, and then it's a case of saying, what are our lives in school like? So it's something that you very rarely get to talk about with teachers or to people working in the school. And I think, so Kiana and Rianne, they're twins, if you hadn't noticed already, decided that they'd do their piece together. So they picked what works well in school and what doesn't work well for them. So the kind of areas they kind of highlighted and what works well is the communication aspect, and even just the willingness to communicate, the willingness to repeat information and not make you feel uncomfortable. Asking those questions they felt was really important. And then making subjects interactive and interesting, I suppose, again, coming back to the point you made earlier of meeting different learning styles and making the lesson as accessible as possible, they found was really important. Things that they highlighted that didn't work as well for them was being rushed, especially during tests, and they highlighted that that they often knew information but just didn't have time to write it down. And it kind of a case of then you're looking at what is the test assessing? Is it speed or is it actual knowledge? And then something else that we kind of thought that has come up a lot has been that teachers who are not discreet when asked questions. So it's kind of a case of if either when asking a question, putting someone on the spot they found was difficult, or if they had to ask the teacher a question, that it wasn't the case that they could just ask them at the side or ask them quietly. It was more a case of they found it difficult if the teacher wanted them to shout it out in class, and then maybe the next time they weren't as willing to ask a question. So some really good insight there and really well done, girls. And then looking on next, we have Ryan, and it kind of highlighting just following instructions can be difficult, especially if there's a lot of instructions put together and they're not easily spaced. And then I think a really good point Ryan made there is when he's praised for his effort, not just by the end result. So if he's trying hard and doing really well, and his teacher saying nice things like they're proud of him, are really important to him. Next, Noah shared a piece about his daily life, and he felt that quite often he would forget certain things, be it books, copies, PE gear, different bits and pieces, and he found that sometimes maybe the allowances weren't made to for something that wasn't intentional. And I think a really nice piece and a sign of the character of Noah is the very end piece when he brings it back to family and friends supporting him, and that was a huge part in his school life, which I think is a really nice piece. And then Chloe does a really nice piece here as well, saying that going from primary school through to secondary school and looking at, I suppose one piece there is the access to resources. And I suppose it wasn't until she was in 6th class that she was able to get her a laptop, and it made a world of difference in her schoolwork, that she wasn't in pain as such writing, and that she was able to still express herself. And I suppose that's something that a lot of young people with dyspraxia or DSD were coming and saying that maybe the handwriting versus laptop aspect was a big query for them. I think it's really good, honest piece there in the middle about nerves and pressure, how they affected her, and it's quite relatable to as well. And I think looking at the last piece, then Chloe's really good to highlight what works well for her, and I think the movement breaks are really good for all people of all sizes in any setting. And I think then the practical subjects, and I think again it's a really nice sign of Chloe that she highlights how much she appreciates her SNAs as something that helps her in school. And then I suppose this is kind of the crux of everything coming towards the end, what the children came up with and the teenagers came up with as their advice that they'd like their teachers to know and for their schools to know. And Chloe has kindly offered to go through these with you now. So thanks, Chloe.
A good teacher has patience. A good teacher is a good listener. Takes time to understand children and appreciates that all children are different. What teachers can do to help children with DCD? Give time to children to complete work, listen to us, help with what I find hard, and try to meet all children's learning styles as best as possible. What I want my teachers to know: I can learn, but in different ways. I have a lot of strengths, not just weaknesses. Who I am as a person, not just in school. Some things are tough for me, but I can find other ways if helped.
Brilliant, Chloe. Thanks a million for reading those out for us. And like they came from the whole group of participants throughout the process. And I think it's a real sign of the character of all the participants that it's not a case of going through and saying we need more resources, we need more money for this and that and the other, we need everything different for us. The real key strand through all that is that they would like to be treated as equals. They want to be understood, and they'd like just to see where they're coming from and see their point of view. And I suppose it's coming back to the original point of living a day in my head and just seeing how can we make this work. And I suppose a lot of the things they ask are things that you could say would be signs of a good teacher for everyone in the classroom, not just children with dyspraxia or DCD. And so that would be the main part of our resource. And I suppose this is probably the most important page nearly at the end, would just be the acknowledgements of the people who have been contributed throughout the piece. Looking at the participants, Chloe, Connor, Gabby, Kiana, Noah, Rianne and Ryan, and they're the true authors of the resource and they deserve all the credit for the whole piece. They've worked incredibly hard and they've been willing to share their amazing talents throughout the whole process. And then very closely followed them by the parents, who put more work than anyone else involved. And especially, I suppose, like this whole resource was put together online as such through Zoom and emails. And without them and their time and support, this wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't be here today. And then looking at all the people working hard with Dyspraxia Ireland, including Harry, Frey and Sharon, if there was anything we needed, any bit of support, any bit of advice, they were so willing, so helpful throughout the whole thing. We couldn't have asked for any more. So thank you so much for that. Tanya McGarry from the University of Limerick for her guidance and support from start to finish. From the day one, she was incredibly positive and supportive, and to the very end of the project, she was involved. So thank you very much. Sharon Drew, who'll be doing the webinar on Friday, for her guidance and expertise in developing ideas and directions. Anytime there's an idea that needs to be bounced or anything that needed a bit of advice, even the interactive app, she was fabulous to help with, and thank you for that. Then looking just the end piece there, Avril Hearn for I suppose her guidance throughout the whole piece, but also the graphic design of the resource. All the pretty colors and textures were beyond me, so that was her part, and also even editing the video there. So thank you for that. And I suppose two people that weren't mentioned there who've been a great help in the last 2 days, as Sharon mentioned, would be Sarah for all her help with the social media, and Trevor over the last 2 days helping us troubleshoot through the scary world of Zoom. So thank you for that. I suppose from now we'll take the questions there, if anyone has some.
That was fantastic, absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephen and Chloe. While we're taking the questions, I just want to point out that we have a poll running here. There's some questions in there. There's only 6 questions. And if you could help us by filling it out before you leave this evening, it would be very much appreciated. It will give us a lot of information on how we can continue to support you and build our services. So Stephen, I'm just going to go through some of the questions that came in. There's a lot of people wanting to know when this resource is going to be made available and how it's going to be shared.
Perfect. So I suppose you're asking me the question, Sharon, but I suppose it's coming back on you nearly that Sharon has offered kindly that it will be shared on the DCD Ireland Dyspraxia website. But also, I suppose, from a point of view of teachers and educators, it will be I've contacted all the education centres around the country and offered it to them, so hopefully they will be circulating it in their newsletters in the coming weeks. And I suppose, yeah, so I suppose those would be the two main areas, either on the website or from your local education centre.
Great. That's, what value do you think this resource is going to have for schools, Stephen?
I suppose looking at the value of it, I think first and foremost, looking at the children here with dyspraxia and DCD, it adds that understanding. Dyspraxia or DCD probably doesn't get the enough awareness for or understanding of what it is, and definitely not of how it affects these people. So I suppose it's going to add that value to both teachers in the schools. But it's not just them; it's their peers in those schools who can read this and say, "All right, I just thought that was something else. We can see this," and it starts to build a bit more of a culture. But also, I suppose, because of the way the children and teenagers have written this and made it, it's really relatable. I think anyone who picks it up can really take a lot from it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's there's a lot of questions coming through, Stephen, from both parents and teachers in relation to how the schools and both parents and teachers can support children in schools. And just looking at the questions coming in, it's really clear, and it emphasizes what you've said, that each child is different and each child receives and needs different supports. So I'm just going to quickly ask you a few of them here. We're not going to get to all of them, but for those of you who don't have your question answered this evening, please check out our website. It's www.dyspraxia.ie, and you can also email into us at info@dyspraxia.ie if you can't find the resources and the answers you're looking for. So Stephen, there's just some questions here around how can teachers help students in their classroom? Well, do you have some key tips? I mean, you're in a wonderful position being both an OT and a teacher.
I suppose it's kind of looking here and saying lots of tips. I suppose first and foremost, like as I said, these children are the experts, and it comes down to getting to know that child in your classroom. That often there can be a variety of needs, they're not just a physical need. There can be a sensory or a way they interpret their world through their senses aspects. There could be other needs involved. So I think like your first and foremost step, and I know it sounds like lip service, but in reality it is, you need to get to know the child first and foremost, know their needs. And then I suppose in Ireland, like I suppose looking around at different resources online and things like that, working towards, it's very hard to say straight off the bat, this will help for a child with dyspraxia. I think that's the whole point of this resource, that it's kind of your general aspects of learning and getting to know them. Thinking of, and I think really when you come back to it, it does come back to the fact of what the children said is appreciating them and understanding. And I don't want to be going off on one particular route. And again, that was their expertise, and anything I could add to that probably isn't fair on them today. Absolutely.
Another question that's come up a few times as well is when you are in a classroom with a child with dyspraxia DCD, do you think it's worth having that discussion with the broader student population in the classroom, obviously with the child's permission? Because we have some parents here saying that other students really don't understand what their child is going through, and that often ends up in maybe some bullying or the child becoming upset at times. So what would your advice in that situation be?
I suppose my advice would be generally the younger the better. That, like, you know, children that when when very young children, 5, 6, 7, when they just hear about this thing, it's like, okay, yeah, this makes it a bit different, but he still plays with me in the yard. He's still just Johnny. It's like, so again, the younger the better. If you can have those conversations and explain, maybe he falls a bit more, you just need to mind him a bit better. And I suppose a good start would be talking to other parents about it and get it that way, because again, children don't want to be seen as different. So if you're having this conversation in a class and educating as a whole group, either that child either sitting there while you talk about them, or they're outside the room in getting resources and they're being talked about behind their back, which isn't necessarily the right way either. So I suppose it's kind of starting with the parents and other parents and working forward and see how that goes. And I suppose each case is different as well. some children just don't want to accept their diagnosis, and that's entirely their decision. And maybe it's a case of they need to grow with that and get used to that. And some people just, and then some are very calm, and some people are very easygoing and are happy for that. And I suppose you need to just think about what would be your child's preference in that. How would they feel, firstly, if everyone saw them as different based on that label? Or is it a case of that they'd just be happy and they could take it in their stride and just be like, this is me, this is who I am? And then I suppose secondly, you're looking at the method in which you go about it. Is it a large group, or maybe is it a smaller group of just your, like the parents that they go to play dates or who they hang out with, would maybe be your starting block and work forward from there, because 5 people knowing is a lot easier to take for a child than 30 people knowing. And I suppose that would be my advice in that point.
That's really helpful. Thanks so much, Stephen. We have a more specific question here, and this is one for you to put the OT hat on with. Can you have a child with just poor fine motor skills and okay gross motor skills, or does it have to be both?
It doesn't have to be both, but like very frequently they come together. So for example, like a handwriting comes from, everyone focuses on the small hand movements, your fingers, your hand grip, things like that. But in reality, it actually comes from upper body, your gross motor, your up shoulder strength. That's where all it goes proximal, which means closer to the body, and works its way out. So I suppose it is possible to have fine motor difficulties in isolation, but it'd be quite rare. Really, it generally comes from like often with children with dyspraxia, you see there's often maybe a core or a middle section weakness or something like that, and then maybe the upper body, upper limbs and things like that. So that would be my answer.
Great. Okay. And I'm going to confuse you now and ask you to put your teacher hat back on again, Stephen. So again, lots of questions coming in around how do parents communicate with schools? We know ourselves how difficult it can be to get awareness out there of dyspraxia DCD is, and because it's so unique to each child, it's not as simple as going in and handing school a leaflet and saying, here you go, this is what it's all about. So for parents who are out there wanting to have that conversation with the school or with their child's teacher, do you have some tips for how they might approach that?
I suppose, like my opinion always with working with parents or working with teachers, working with parents would always be that open and clear relationships are really important. So from a parent's point of view, I think regular communication, either every fortnight, every month, even if it's a 5-minute chat, is really beneficial, just because I always felt that the child at home versus the child at school, particularly in children with dyspraxia who are having to sit up straight, spending all their energy, are so fatigued at home, it's totally different. And both sides don't necessarily see both sides of the coin from that point of view. So what you don't know, you can't help, is really important. So I think clear and open communication things are really important from the get-go. I suppose it's looking at in schools, like there's generally like for teachers in schools, there's normally you've got special education need teachers there, SEN teachers who would have maybe a stronger background in those areas, who could be a mentorship role for the teacher to go to and discuss. I suppose, again, don't catch the other person on the hop and meet them at the gate and say it. Have a meeting and just say, I'd just like to have a chat about that in advance. And I suppose anything else in relation to just keeping those open links, I suppose that would be my main advice, would be to keep the links open and to just use what resources are available, especially within the school. If as a teacher you don't know, I know myself, I wouldn't have known a massive amount until I went researching DCD and dyspraxia. So either there's great websites, both your own website in Dyspraxia Ireland, as well as there's other resources available as well.
Absolutely. We do find a lot of people contact us for information and resources. So yes,
yeah. And I must say as well that brilliant for getting back to people and emailing. In my experiences, anyone has had any issues have always come back and said that they were found. I know you've been ran ragged at times trying to get to them all, but in fairness to you.
Thanks, Stephen. That's much appreciated. Here's a more sensitive question that's come up from a number of parents. It's in relation to how they tell their child that the child has a diagnosis of dyspraxia DCD. Some parents are not sure how to raise the subject, and not sure whether the child is too young to understand or should they leave it till later. So what advice would you have for parents in that situation, Stephen?
I suppose, as you said, it is a sensitive issue and it should be approached with sensitivity. I think looking back, I think Noah would have given a brilliant explanation in his video saying that you can do anything you want to do. It just might be a little bit harder. And I think that's the kind of attitude you'd be looking at, that it's not, as we said through the piece, it's not a barrier. It might be a little bit of an obstacle, but it's not going to be any different. And it says, in this case, I think when I worked with a lot of children with dyspraxia, DCD, it was a case of, so a lot of them knew things they couldn't do. They knew that they weren't the best footballer. They knew that they said that they weren't a good artist. But when you challenge that, or you discuss what are you good at, and looked at that. So I suppose looking at things, yeah, maybe you have gotten this. The doctor said this, or whoever you met said this. But what difference does it make to who you are? You're still a really good reader. You still are brilliant for minding your pet dog. Like, again, a positive spin and a positive focus in discussions. It's like if they're diagnosed with dyspraxia at 5, 6 or 15, 16, it doesn't, like, they've still lived with it to that stage. So it's not going to change the person they are. It probably, and again, looking at the positive, it probably just means that they'll get more help than what they thought they were getting it for. Even looking at, like, say, Chloe's point of view with the laptop made her life so much easier. Whereas if she hadn't got the diagnosis at the time, she wouldn't have got her laptop, and then she's there struggling writing. And again, it's just, I suppose, looking at the positives and emphasizing nothing's changing, we're just moving forward, and you can do anything as long as you try hard.
Well said, Stephen. And Chloe, you're an absolute testament to that as well. There's a question that's come in around allowing children in the classroom to have short breaks. So obviously concentration is very hard, sitting still sometimes is very hard. I also understand it from a teacher's point of view that they have lessons to get through, they have a class to keep under control. How do teachers balance that? Have you any tips for them?
Great question. I suppose first and foremost, I'd look at the resources available. So I know, like, you have PDST have a new resource for movement in the classroom, particularly linked with COVID. So it's kind of distance moving. And the Irish Heart Foundation have busy breaks that are a great idea. It's just kind of, again, they separate them. I haven't seen the newest, I haven't researched the newest updated ones, but the older ones were like cardio, they were stretches, and then they were relaxation ones. I think when you look at any type of busy break, or it doesn't necessarily have to be a movement break, they're kind of broken into 3 areas, which would be 1, your movement break, 2 would be your mental breaks, that's your mindfulness, meditation, breathing, and 3 would be your distraction. So it might just be a little crossword or an activity. But again, coming back to the movement break aspect, I think I always found when I was teaching that blending it into the curriculum was the best way to go. So, like, if it was tables, it's 3 times 3, 3, 6, 9, 3 jumping jacks, 3, 6, 9. If it was a case of doing your verbs in Irish, it was running is rit. So you were doing rit, out of your place. Everyone's doing it. And once you kind of set up again, when you have 30 children doing it, it's not easy the first day. But once you set up ground rules and just make sure it's safe, no problems there. I think also, like, sometimes I suppose you're always worried about giving a child that you think is distractible the jobs, but it can be as simple as just saying, come here, will you go over and open that window for me? Get up out of the seat. No one's paying an none the wiser. It's very inclusive in the class. It doesn't have to be the same child every time. But if you know that child, you're working with that child every day, you can see their triggers of when they're starting to get a small bit anxious, or if they're getting a small bit fidgety in their chair. I know one thing as well, fidgets, that, like, so it depends on where the line is. So there you can get all these fabulous fidgets. Don't go near fidget spinners. They're nothing. They don't help as much. They're just a gimmick. But there's fabulous ones. And my recommendations again would be, have a look on the special education websites and things like that, and then go and look for a cheaper alternative, Amazon, Wish, or any of those. And I suppose as well, I think it was one of the children said to me that one of the teachers gave them blue tack. So blue tack's the thing that's in the classroom. It's in their hand. They can fidget with that. It's not a big flexible toy that looks silly. It's normal. Anyone could have it. And I think just looking at things like that, or even if it was just, I think just build it into your routine, build it into your curriculum, and just be inventive. Try it. If it doesn't work, so be it. It's 30 seconds, you didn't maximize. But if it does work, brilliant, you've got a new tool for the rest of the year.
Stephen, there's so many parents. I can almost hear the sighs out there saying, oh gosh, why can't we all have a Stephen in our classroom or our school? They're absolutely wonderful tips, really, really inclusive, and as you say, builds the support needs around the curriculum. It's wonderful. I just wanted to read something out here. There's a message from Yvonne who says, the best communication I ever received about a student with dyspraxia was a letter written by the child's mother outlining how he learns. It personalized him and his learning style. Official reports can be too long and complex to read, especially as in most classes we have a number of children with SEN. One size definitely doesn't fit all. So
I think Yvonne's hitting the nail on the head there.
yeah, absolutely. And that ties in so much to your presentation, and Chloe and the other students who worked with you to put it together and to outline what they need, what their needs are, and how they'd like to work with their teachers in their schools.
100%. And I think it just basically said, I think Yvonne's right in the same track as us there, and saying that it's the experts are the children, their families. It's not necessarily the therapists or the teachers who are the experts in that child. I think that's fabulous. Thank you, Yvonne.
Absolutely. Just on a practical point here, a question, how do I approach the school about making an application for a laptop for my son who's in 6th class? I find it hard to discuss his needs without coming across as a pushy parent, because he performs well at school, and perhaps teachers don't understand how DCD affects him on a daily basis.
I suppose, so with application for a laptop, it comes through that you need to go to either you have brilliant, but first step would be kind of getting the handwriting assessment from an occupational therapist, I suppose, and seeing is there a need for it there at the start, and then maybe you can either potentially do some work with an OT on that, or if the OT thinks that that there is a need, they'll give a recommendation, and I suppose that can either come through, the early intervention team or the primary care team, or it can, and there's also the private route if that's not working for you. And I suppose my thing on handwriting, things like that, would be, your handwriting is a mode of expression, and obviously 99% of people need the functional writing, signing your name, writing a birthday card, but after that it's a mode of expression. So if it's causing you torment in handwriting and taking ages or anything like that, and a laptop would be easier and more suitable, then that's the route to go. So once you have that recommendation letter from the occupational therapist, it's then a case of bringing it up with the school and the teacher, and then it'll come through the school, and I think you'll go through the principal to make that application for that laptop then.
Now, I'm conscious that we've nearly worn you out, Stephen, not long to go now. There's so many questions here. We're just not going to get through them all this evening, but what we'll try and do is perhaps put together a Q&A sheet that we can put up onto our website for parents and teachers to go in and have a look at. Stephen, this is, going back to the resource, it's such a wonderful thing to have, and something that yourself and Chloe and the other students are rightly proud of. How do we get the word out to schools, and how do we share this across other schools and get it in there to the teachers who are looking for it?
So I suppose the first steps I've made so far have been contacting the education centres, and it's been relatively positive. A number have gotten back, and I'll be emailing now tomorrow with the resource, in the hope that they'll send it out. And a couple have already agreed, and hopefully tomorrow we'll get on when it's a physical resource sent to them as a link. And I suppose that's step one, education. So there's approximately 20-30 education centres around the country, where all teachers go for their training, but primary and second, for some of their training for primary and secondary, and then they have mailing lists. And I suppose it's not necessarily a case of aiming to get it sent to every teacher, but if we can get it to every school and then circulate it around, it's a nice resource, it's colourful. I suppose that's step one. And step two is we'll be looking to apply for funding, see if we can get the physical resource, start sending it around to schools in that sense. And I suppose it's word of mouth. It's the same with everything. If you think this resource is fabulous, start saying it. Oh yeah. Next time you're talking to the teacher, if you are a teacher talking to the staff in the staff room, saying I was at this webinar, it was really good. If you're a parent, just mention it to your class teacher, saying this was fabulous, or whatever you think. If you don't think it was fabulous, that's fine too. But just handing out the resource and getting it to them, and then circulating around. So like, I know I have contacted a number of schools of the children that were participants and sent it. And I know a number of teachers from those schools are here, and thank you very much for coming. And I suppose that's kind of the starting point, that like there are seven participants here who are now spokespeople for themselves, if they want, and they've openly said that at the start now. And I suppose it's starting from there. And I suppose that's kind of where we start, get on the floor, get into those schools and work forward from there.
That's it. Yeah, and it's such a great turnout as well this evening. So thank you all for coming along and joining in. Really, really great resource. I think, you know, Stephen, you've covered so much in such a short space of time, and I'm sure there's going to be a much greater appetite as we go along, and the resource is tried out in schools and more teachers get on board. So we're definitely going to see you, and hopefully Chloe back here again in the not too distant future. So I just want to say a huge thank you to you both again, and please pass on our thanks to all of the other students who are involved in the production of the resource as well. Is that okay?
Most definitely, and thank you, Sharon, and thanks to everyone, and thanks to everyone who turned up on their Monday evening. Much appreciated.
Thanks so much, Stephen. So thank